You really should give up the profession entirely, as a matter of principle. For 3 decades, Richard Boone kept quiet about the role that destroyed him. It made him a star, but behind the scenes, he was drowning. Now, the dark truth emerges. The alcoholism that nearly killed him, the dream project NBC sabotaged, and why he fled to Hawaii to escape it all. This is the untold story of how television's greatest gunslinger lost everything while fighting for his art. Richard Boone was born on June 18, 1917, in Los Angeles, California. His father, Kirk Etna Boone, was a successful corporate lawyer. His mother, Cecile Lillian Beckerman, was a singer with Russian Jewish roots. The Boone family was wealthy, but their home was shaped by more than just privilege. Boone's father came from a long line of Americans, tracing back to Squire Boone, the younger brother of legendary frontiersman Daniel Boone. His mother's background brought a different cultural influence, creating a household where history and art blended. As a child, Boone was caught between two worlds. His father's side represented discipline and tradition, while his mother's love for music and creativity gave him an early appreciation for the arts. Growing up in Los Angeles meant being surrounded by a city on the rise, full of opportunity. But at this stage, Boone had no plans to become an actor. He focused on school, excelling in both academics and sports. When he was 11, his family moved to Glendale, where he attended Hoover High School. He became a strong football player, playing as an offensive guard under Coach Vic Cameron. The sport required toughness and strategy, traits Boone carried with him for the rest of his life. But football wasn't the only thing that interested him. He had a deep appreciation for literature and storytelling, though he didn't yet know how important that would become. Boone also had a mischievous side. He was known for playing pranks, including one during his college years when he and some friends staged an elaborate joke with a dummy on a road near Stanford University. His humor was sharp, but he also had a restless energy that kept pushing him toward new experiences. After high school, he enrolled at Stanford University, one of the most prestigious colleges in the country. But something didn't feel right. College life wasn't enough for him. He wanted something more, something real. In 1937, he dropped out and began exploring different jobs. He worked as an oil rigger, doing hard physical labor that toughened him. He tried his hand at painting and writing. He even took up boxing, stepping into the ring to test his endurance and strength. Then came World War II. In 1941, Boone joined the U.S. Navy. He served as an aviation ordnance man and a tail gunner on TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. His job was dangerous, requiring him to fire at enemy aircraft from the back of the plane while flying through combat zones. He spent 4 years in the Pacific Theater, stationed on 3 different ships. The war tested him, shaping his perspective on life in ways few could understand. The war was behind him, but the future was unclear. Like many veterans, he had to start over. The GI Bill gave him that chance. It covered education for returning soldiers, opening doors that once seemed out of reach. Boone chose acting. He enrolled at the Actors Studio in New York City, a place known for training some of the best actors in the country. He studied under Sanford Meisner, a coach who believed acting wasn't about memorizing lines. It was about reacting, feeling, and making every moment real. Boone embraced that idea. He worked hard and developed a methodical style that made him stand out. He didn't just focus on acting. He also trained in movement with Martha Graham, one of the most respected choreographers of the time. Every lesson added something new, shaping the performer he would become. Without the GI Bill, none of this would have been possible. It didn't just pay for his training. It gave him a path forward, turning a veteran into an artist. By 1947, he was ready for the stage. His Broadway debut came in Medea, a revival of a Greek tragedy. The production was a major event, directed by John Gielgud and starring Judith Anderson, one of the greatest stage actresses of the time. The play opened at the National Theatre before moving to the Royal Theatre. It ran for 214 performances, a long and successful run. Boone played a soldier. It wasn't a leading role, but it put him in the middle of a powerful production. Anderson's performance was intense. She even won a Tony Award for it. Sharing the stage with actors of that caliber was an incredible learning experience. For Boone, it was proof that his hard work was paying off. His next big step came in 1948 with Macbeth. This role proved he could handle Shakespeare, one of the biggest challenges for any actor. Then in 1950, he appeared in The Man, a Broadway drama directed by Martin Ritt. The play explored morality and human conflict, themes Boone would often revisit in his later work. It ran for 92 performances and gave him another chance to work with respected artists. Richard Boone's Hollywood journey began in 1950 when he signed a 7-year contract with 20th Century Fox. Moving from Broadway to the big screen was a major step, but Boone had the presence and intensity that made him stand out. His film debut came in Halls of Montezuma, 1951, a World War II drama directed by Louis Milestone. He played Lieutenant Colonel Gilfillan, a Marine officer, alongside Richard Widmark, Jack Palance, and Karl Malden. The film wasn't just about war. It was also used as a recruitment tool for the U.S. Marine Corps, adding a patriotic significance to Boone's first role. Even as part of an ensemble, Boone's performance stood out. His deep voice and rugged features made him a natural fit for military roles, something that would define the early years of his career. But it wasn't just about how he looked. He had trained at the Actors Studio in New York, where he developed a methodical approach to acting. That training helped him bring realism and depth to his characters. Halls of Montezuma was more than just a first movie. It set the tone for his career, proving he could bring weight and intensity to any role. The film itself was ahead of its time, using flashbacks to explore the backstories of soldiers. That added layers to what could have been a simple war film. 2 years later, Boone took on a role that would cement his ability to play complex characters. In The Robe, 1953. He played Pontius Pilate in a story about the Roman tribune Marcellus Gallio, played by Richard Burton. The film was the first ever released in CinemaScope, changing the way movies were seen on the big screen. Boone's time as Pilate was brief, but he made an impact. He didn't play him as a heartless villain. Instead, he showed a man weighed down by his choices. He understood what he had done, but he chose to ignore his own guilt. One of his most memorable moments in the film was a small but powerful gesture. After symbolically washing his hands to absolve himself of responsibility for Jesus' fate, Pilate later asks for water again. It was an unconscious moment, a sign that the guilt had not left him. Boone's delivery of lines like, "Did I?" "So I did," added to Pilate's detached but burdened nature. The film earned over $17 million and proved that biblical epics had a place in Hollywood. For Boone, it was another step in shaping his career. He was not just another character actor. He was someone who could make even a brief role unforgettable. That same year, Boone took on a completely different role in Vicky, 1953, a dark and unsettling film noir. He played Lieutenant Ed Cornell, a detective investigating the murder of a rising model named Vicky Lynn. But Cornell was not a typical detective. He was obsessed. Boone's performance made him both terrifying and fascinating. He wasn't just solving a case. He had a personal fixation on Vicky that made the story feel more like a psychological thriller than a murder mystery. As the film unfolds, Cornell's obsession becomes clear. He interrogates suspects with relentless force. He appears at their homes uninvited, making them uneasy. But the most chilling moment comes when his apartment is revealed. It is filled with photographs of Vicky, arranged like a shrine. This wasn't just about justice. Cornell's mind was unraveling. Boone's performance made sure the audience felt that descent into obsession. Vicky became more than just a crime film. It was a study of a man losing control. Boone built his career on roles like these. He never played simple heroes or villains. He played men who carried burdens, made difficult choices, and often struggled with their own morality. His deep voice and brooding presence made him stand out, but it was his ability to bring complexity to every character that made him unforgettable. Richard Boone's time on Medic wasn't just another acting job. It was a turning point in his career and a bold step for television. The show aired from 1954 to 1956 on NBC, running for 2 seasons. Boone played Dr. Conrad Steiner, a dedicated physician dealing with real medical cases. But he wasn't just the lead actor. He also served as the show's narrator, introducing each episode with a serious and thoughtful tone. This wasn't the kind of medical drama that sugar-coated reality. It was raw, unflinching, and far ahead of its time. What made Medic stand out was its commitment to realism. Instead of filming on simple sets, the crew shot scenes at Los Angeles County Hospital. Real doctors were involved behind the scenes to ensure medical accuracy. The show tackled issues that were rarely discussed on television, including mental illness, autism, infertility, and even the terrifying effects of atomic bomb attacks. One episode, Flash of Darkness, showed doctors treating victims of an atomic explosion, a subject that reflected the deep fears of the Cold War era. Boone's performance as Dr. Steiner added to the show's credibility. He played the role with quiet strength, making the audience believe in both his medical skill and his compassion. The very first episode, White is the Color, told the heartbreaking story of a pregnant woman diagnosed with terminal leukemia. It was a risky choice for television at the time, but it proved that Medic was not afraid to show the harsh realities of life and death. Even though Medic earned critical acclaim, it struggled to compete with the massively popular I Love Lucy, which aired in the same time slot. The show never reached a huge audience, but its influence on future medical dramas was undeniable. Decades later, shows like ER and Grey's Anatomy would follow the same path that Medic had paved, bringing realistic medical storytelling to a mainstream audience. Boone's work on the show helped prove that television could be serious, intelligent, and thought-provoking. But Boone had a complicated relationship with television. He took acting seriously and put everything into his roles. But the fast-paced production schedules frustrated him. He believed television often focused on getting episodes out quickly rather than taking the time to make them truly great. Network interference made things even worse. NBC once canceled an episode featuring a cesarean section birth because they feared it would be too controversial. Boone was passionate about bringing realism to the screen, but he was constantly running into television's limits. Still, he stayed committed to Medic. He worked closely with creator James Moser to maintain the show's high standards. Critics praised its intelligent scripts and bold storytelling, but Boone wanted more control over his work. After Medic, he moved on to Have Gun, Will Travel, a show that allowed him to have more creative influence. He not only starred in the series, but also directed multiple episodes, shaping the show in a way he never could with Medic. His role as Dr. Steiner had already proven that he could bring depth and complexity to a character. That same ability helped him turn Paladin, the cultured but deadly gunslinger in Have Gun, Will Travel, into one of the most memorable figures in television history. Paladin wasn't a typical Western hero. He was intelligent, strategic, and driven by a strong moral code. Boone brought all of these qualities to life, making the character both intriguing and unpredictable. Richard Boone changed the way people saw Western heroes on television. His role as Paladin in Have Gun, Will Travel was unlike anything that had come before. Paladin wasn't just a tough gunslinger. He was a man of culture who lived in luxury at San Francisco's Hotel Carlton. He dressed in tailored suits, quoted poetry, and enjoyed fine wine. But when a job called for it, he became a different man. He put on his black outfit, strapped on his holster, and rode out into the wilderness to take on criminals, corrupt officials, and anyone else who stood in the way of justice. Paladin worked as a hired gun, but money was never his true motivation. He charged wealthy clients $1,000 per job, yet he often took on cases for free when he believed in the cause. His calling card, a simple black card with a white knight chess piece and the words, "Have Gun, Will Travel," symbolized his way of thinking. He was strategic, calculating, and always in control. He wasn't just another cowboy who solved problems with a gun. He used his mind first and resorted to violence only when necessary. This made the show stand out from other westerns of the time. Most cowboy heroes were men of action, quick to draw their guns and settle things with a fight. Paladin was different. He preferred words over bullets, reason over brute force. When he did fight, it was only after he had exhausted every other option. This approach gave the show a sense of intelligence and depth that many westerns lacked. The series became one of the most successful shows of its time. It ran for 6 years, airing 225 episodes, and stayed in the top 5 of the Nielsen ratings for most of its run. Unlike many TV shows, it was even adapted into a radio series, after its success on television. Critics praised its strong writing and moral complexity, and audiences responded to its unique take on the Western genre. Paladin's name came from the legendary knights who served Charlemagne, and Boone leaned into that idea. He made sure Paladin wasn't just a skilled gunfighter, but a man guided by a personal code of honor. Over time, he shaped the character himself. He softened Paladin's obsession with money, added humor, and deepened his sense of justice. Paladin became more than just a Western hero. He became a symbol of intelligence, morality, and strength. Boone didn't just act in the series. He helped shape it behind the scenes. He directed 28 episodes, stepping in when the main director, Andrew McLaglen, couldn't handle the full workload. At first, it was just a necessity, but he soon developed a passion for directing. He focused on character development, making sure the emotional weight of the story was just as important as the action. His work behind the camera helped give the show its depth. He collaborated closely with writers, including Gene Roddenberry, who later created Star Trek. Together, they made sure Have Gun, Will Travel wasn't just another shoot-'em-up Western. It was a show that asked big questions about justice, morality, and power. But while audiences loved Paladin, Boone began to feel trapped. He was a trained Broadway and method actor, used to playing different roles. But now, he was playing the same character over and over again. He once said that returning to the role each season felt like drawing water from a well that kept getting deeper. Another time, he compared it to watching a boxer who was still fighting but had lost his edge. Boone respected the show, but he needed something new. Even though he was restless, he never let it affect his work. He gave every performance his best effort, and fans never saw his frustration. But when Have Gun, Will Travel, ended in 1963, he was ready to move on. His next project, The Richard Boone Show, was an anthology series where he played a different role every week. It gave him the creative freedom he had been missing. To stay engaged during Have Gun, Will Travel, Boone explored other creative outlets. He directed several episodes, working alongside respected filmmakers like Andrew V. McLaglen. He said directing required subtlety and imagination, and it kept him interested when acting as Paladin started to feel repetitive. He also returned to theater. In 1959, he starred as Abraham Lincoln in The Rivalry, a play about the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates. It had been years since he performed on stage, and he admitted he was nervous. But the play ran for 81 performances and helped him reconnect with the excitement of live acting. Richard Boone never hesitated to speak his mind. In a 1960 interview, he called most television a waste of time. He believed the industry cared more about profits than good storytelling. Every season, producers kept recycling old ideas instead of creating something fresh. Boone saw television as stuck in a cycle, repeating itself while quality slowly disappeared. He wasn't just complaining, he fought to make Have Gun, Will Travel different from other Westerns. He pushed for deeper characters and better scripts, refusing to let the show become just another formulaic production. But no matter how much effort he put in, he saw the same problem everywhere. Many people in the industry were happy to produce forgettable content as long as it made money. Boone saw trouble ahead. He warned that if television kept following this pattern, audiences would start losing interest. He pointed out that something similar had already happened to Hollywood in the late 1950s, when moviegoers began turning away from predictable films. He turned out to be right. By the 1970s, television faced growing competition from new forms of entertainment. His issues with Hollywood went even deeper. He believed the system treated actors as nothing more than products. Studio executives didn't care about talent or artistic integrity. They only cared about what would sell. Even with his fame and success, Boone often felt like he was just another name on a contract. He also hated the culture behind the scenes. He couldn't stand how some actors cared more about dressing rooms and perks than about their performances. He believed the real competition should be about finding great roles, not securing bigger trailers. That belief shaped The Richard Boone Show, where he gave actors the freedom to play a variety of characters instead of being trapped in the same roles. Richard Boone had spent years playing Paladin on Have Gun, Will Travel, and while the role made him a star, it also trapped him. He wanted something new, something different. In 1963, he created The Richard Boone Show, an anthology series where a small group of actors played different roles each week. It was like a theater company for television, a bold experiment at a time when networks preferred familiar characters and predictable stories. Boone had a strong vision for the show, but problems started almost immediately. Clifford Odets, the original story editor, died just as the series was getting started. His replacement struggled to keep the same creative energy. NBC executives weren't happy either. They wanted more action, more excitement, something that would pull in big audiences. Boone refused to change the show's direction. He believed in what he was creating. But despite great reviews, and even a Golden Globe win, the show didn't last. It was canceled after one season. The network didn't even tell Boone directly. He found out later, and it left him furious. Hollywood felt like a dead end. Boone had given everything to the industry, but he was tired of fighting for control. In 1964, he walked away and moved to Hawaii. It wasn't just about escaping. He wanted to build something new. He had loved the islands since his time in the Navy and believed they could become a real center for filmmaking. He convinced Leonard Freeman to shoot Hawaii 5-0 entirely on location instead of splitting production with California. He also tried to launch his own show with the film Kona Coast, hoping it would lead to a full series. But CBS passed, choosing Hawaii 5-0 instead. During his years in Hawaii, Boone still acted, but his career never reached the same heights. He starred in Rio Conchos in 1964, playing a bitter Confederate soldier seeking revenge. It was a strong performance, but the film didn't stand out. 3 years later, he played Cicero Grimes in Hombre, one of his best villain roles. He went head-to-head with Paul Newman in a tense, gripping Western that critics loved. But by then, the genre was fading. The days of Western heroes dominating film and television were coming to an end. By 1971, Boone returned to the mainland, though he kept his home in Hawaii and visited often. He took roles where he could, including Heck Ramsey, a show about an aging lawman adjusting to modern crime solving. It lasted 2 seasons. Hollywood had moved on, and Boone knew it. He had fought for creative freedom, taken risks, and refused to play by the industry's rules. But in the end, the industry had changed, and there was no place for him at the top anymore. Richard Boone had the kind of presence that made him unforgettable. On screen, he was commanding. Off screen, he carried a weight that few could see. His struggles with alcoholism and depression shaped his life, affecting both his career and his health. Many believe his drinking started as a way to cope with his past. During World War II, Boone served as a gunner in the Pacific, a job that left him with scars he never fully escaped. Over time, alcohol became his way of numbing those memories. What began as a habit turned into something much harder to control. By the 1970s, Boone's drinking had reached a breaking point. It wasn't just affecting his personal life. It was interfering with his work. During the production of God's Gun in 1976, he walked off set before recording his dialogue. The studio had to bring in another actor to dub his voice. Incidents like this made it harder for him to get work. But alcohol wasn't his only struggle. Boone had also grown disillusioned with Hollywood. He had dedicated years to the industry, yet he often felt overlooked. The cancellation of The Richard Boone Show in 1964 was a turning point. He had poured his heart into that project, believing it would be something special. When it ended, so did much of his faith in the business. Over time, that frustration pushed him away. He left Hollywood, first moving to Hawaii, then later to Florida. His struggles didn't just cost him stability, they also cost him career-defining opportunities. One of the biggest came in 1973 when Paul Newman wanted him for The Sting. Boone was offered the role of Doyle Lonigan, a part that would later go to Robert Shaw. It was a great opportunity, but he turned it down. Some believe he refused because he had made enough money from Have Gun, Will Travel. Others think his drinking had made it impossible for him to commit. Whatever the reason, it was a decision that changed his career forever. By then, his health had already started to decline. Boone was a heavy smoker, known to go through as many as 100 cigarettes a day. Years of drinking and smoking finally caught up with him when doctors discovered he had throat cancer. Faced with treatment, Boone made a decision that shocked those around him. He refused medical help. Instead, he chose to spend his final years in seclusion, far from the industry that had once defined him. On January 10th, 1981, Richard Boone passed away at his home in St. Augustine, Florida. He was 63. His ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean off Hawaii, a quiet farewell to the place where he had found peace in his later years. His life was filled with both triumph and struggle. He had the talent to be one of Hollywood's greatest, but his demons held him back. Even so, his legacy remains. As Paladin in Have Gun, Will Travel, he left behind a performance that still stands as one of television's most unforgettable.